Okay, so well, thank you for inviting me. Today I will talk about intermediate wheatgrass Kernza, that is an emerging perennial grain and forage crop. My name is Priscila Pinto, and I am a postdoc at Valentin Picasso Labs. So there are two important things that I would like, or two important characteristics that I would like to highlight about intermediate wheatgrass Kernza. And is that this crop is a perennial crop and also is a dual purpose crop. So here you can see an intermediate wheatgrass Kernza plant compared with the wheat plant. And Kernza is known for this large root system. So as Kernza is a perennial crop, that means that farmers can plant this crop in the fall, and then will harvest the grain the next summer. And after they harvest the grain, the crop can regrow, and we can harvest again grain the following year. So that means that it's a perennial. So they don't need to plant the crop every year, but can harvest grain and forage from the same crop. And this crop can last 3 or 4 years with a good grain production. And also an interesting thing that is a perennial crop is that it has a lot of environmental benefits. So if we compare with
Priscilla, can I interrupt you real quick? Because I just saw Nicole join and
okay. So I can continue then.
okay.
But this is a brief introduction about Kernza.
Cool. Thanks,
Hi,
Priscilla.
Nicole.
I'm so sorry, you guys. I was just gonna write that I can pop back in at the end. I didn't want to interrupt. Yeah.
No, I think it's fine. Yeah, you can go ahead and Priscilla will just carry on after you've talked about your work. So
Okay. Well, pardon me, Priscilla and everybody, for being late to this. Can you remind me what would be most useful for me to share, Stefan?
yeah, I think just kind of an overview of what you're working on, just like what kind of research you're doing this coming year and what you wrapped up last year. Just kind of maybe not get into too much detail, but kind of just your major projects that you're working on.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, hi everyone. I'm Nicole Tautges. I'm at the Michael Fields Agricultural Institute. We're in southeastern Wisconsin. I'm part of the same team with Priscilla on the Kernza cap. So we are hosting a research site, but I also have 18 acres of Kernza in production. And so I think we're one of 3 growers in the state who brought Kernza grain to market this past year. And so that was interesting. We planted the crop in fall of 2020. It did establish successfully, but took a while. When we talk to growers, we talk about how establishment is a very important part of Kernza, obviously, but it's a common fail point. So I think the stats from the Land Institute show that 1/3 of Kernza plantings in the last 2 or 3 years have failed. So that's a critical point for providing a lot of information and grower support to make sure that they get establishment done successfully and that you get a strong stand. So that's something that we talk about a lot for technical service providers and when we're bringing growers on board, and also in imagining new research studies as well. So we established in fall of 2020. The first year we have a certified organic stand. I think at least one of the other growers in Wisconsin also has a certified organic stand. the market is much stronger right now for certified organic grain than it is for conventional. Although, to be honest, the market is kind of down right now for both. So that's really the biggest challenge. Confronting the commercialization team and then just people interested in making Kernza profitable, which is most of us. And then let's see, in year one, because of a lot of equipment snafus, and it was like, we got an old combine out of storage. It had some issues during harvest because it had been shelved for a long time. So I had decided to swath the Kernza the first year because I had seen them harvest that way in Minnesota. And then because of the equipment issues, it sat in the windrow too long. And so my crop came back as testing too high for DON or vomitoxin. Our levels exceeded the thresholds for safe food sales. So I wasn't able to sell it, unfortunately, and I had to dump it. So no profitability there. And that's another big risk point with Kernza is the DON or vomitoxin. And it's not super rare that people have encountered that. I don't know what the stats are offhand. You know, maybe one in 40, 1 in 50 crops, maybe even a little lower than that, test too high for DON. So that's also something that we need to be aware of when we're talking to growers and thinking about risk management. But this year, happily, I engaged a custom combiner and we direct cut it. So I decided not to swath. The direct cutting went fine. We used more or less oat settings on a common John Deere with a Draper header type combine. It went very smoothly. The combine even threshed some of with those settings properly adjusted, it threshed maybe 10 to 20% of the raw grain out of the hulls, which is, I suppose, a good thing. And so like that approached really well, worked really well, and we are, recommending that kind of direct cutting experience to growers in Wisconsin and that kind of harvest management. After that, it was stored in a gravity wagon. We did have a cleaner here in Southeast Wisconsin come online who was able to clean and dehull the grain, which was awesome for me. We had been kind of talking to this toll cleaner outfit. They're actually in our town. They're in East Troy. And they were interested in working with us on Kernza, and they happen to have the right screen sizes, which was amazing. So we were able to actually get it cleaned, and I'm milling it kind of to order, and we're selling it out of the kind of for-profit entity of our institute. Because we're an institute, we can just do these sorts of things. It's a flexible situation to be in, but a farmer could absolutely do that too. The other route, I did sell some of it through the Perennial Promise Growers Co-op, and it's going to a brewery, which should be there, a brewery in Milwaukee, who plans to, hopefully, if all goes well, release a Kernza beer. And we get a lot of questions, and I don't think we have good answers yet about, like, if people want hulled or dehulled grain for brewing. I don't know the answer. I'm not a food scientist or a brewer, but I just know that this particular entity did want it dehulled. So that was part of the process. I guess I just wanted to, Priscilla's going to tell you just absolutely everything about the research, which is in her extremely astute way. So I just wanted to chime in and talk more about the marketing. Huge challenge. There's not good of information available for end users of how to use it, and I've put that out there as something we need to work on next. There are like 2 pages that exist, but I think just handing people those hasn't been working super well from my experience. maybe other people have been more successful at bringing new end users on board. But we get calls from growers who say, well, how do I sell this stuff? And there are the two routes. You can, in the Midwest, you can sell through the Minnesota-based co-op, which has paperwork and dues associated with it. But then, you know, you're kind of outsourcing the marketing legwork and they're finding buyers for you. So those are kind of the pros, cons. And then and I've tried both. And then, or you can direct market to yourself, which is what I found a lot more people in Wisconsin are open to. I don't know if it's because they don't want to work with people so far away in Minnesota. That's probably part of it, or there's just more of a direct market, independent marketing kind of spirit compared to cooperatives. Either way, like, I don't have opinions. That's just what I've observed. And so now we're talking to people more about direct marketing and reaching out to restaurateurs and bakers, and how do we get it milled the way people want, and how do we get the grain to brewers or distillers in the way they want. And so I'm excited about having more of these conversations, having more people talk to end users, having different sorts of folks and communities talking about it. And hopefully that sort of grassroots swell of marketing is going to help Kernza in Wisconsin. And I think that there's a lot of potential for us to grow and that we can catch up with Minnesota production a little bit. So thanks to this seminar and Stefan and UW for, you know, kind of pushing this a little bit. I hope that was useful, and I can take any questions, but then I don't want to take a ton of Priscilla's time either.
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah. Anybody have any questions?
I was thinking about using it like on a personal level as like adding it whole to soups or using the forage portion for chickens, backyard chickens. And I just wondered if you had any ideas on those two uses.
I know that I've heard of people grazing with chickens before and it works just fine. It handles defoliation really well. We even think that it might benefit stand longevity to have some defoliation, particularly in the fall. So we can think about timing there. In the spring, if you're going for grain production, you want to make sure you pull them off pretty early. Like definitely by the 1st of May, you don't want to do any defoliation. Otherwise we start to see with grazing some yield hits there. And then can you say the first part of the question again was whole grain? I didn't quite catch that.
Yeah, like I have a soup where my most recent one, I just put in whole wheat berries, and I've seen Kernza, it's smaller. So I kind of thought maybe it's more like rice or something like that. So I was just curious if it's outside the typical, what I imagine the typical use of grains as whole berries.
Oh, that's a really good question. You know, I think in soup, and I'm not the greatest culinarian, but I think it would kind of be like wild rice because it has a higher bran and protein to endosperm carbohydrate ratio. So I think that's a really good idea, actually.
Cool. And I want to know where to get some seed.
You can email me if it's for, we'll have to call it grain, not seed. I can't give people seed. I can sell people grain.
Okay.
You can also, I'll put my email in the chat, and then you can also order online from perennialpantry.com, which is the Minnesota.
Thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that Perennial Pantry has some really good Kernza products. They have a CSA share now that you can they ship it out across the country, I think. And I got one for December, and there was some, you know, pancake mix, crackers, There's like a pilaf with Kernza grains, tortillas, some really good stuff in there. So, and you can get a half share if a full share is too much. But yeah, I love the pancake mix, and the crackers are awesome. And you can buy individual products too on the website. Any other questions for Nicole?
Great. Well, thanks. Thanks for the invite, and let's hear from Priscilla.
Yeah.
Excited.
Thanks a lot, Nicole. Appreciate it. That was
Thank
great.
you.
Thank you, Nicole. Well, as I was mentioned, one of the interesting characteristics of this crop is that it's a perennial crop, and we are looking for perennial crops because the environmental benefits. So I just want to compare with a common annual crop rotation when we need to plant these crops every year, and usually we need to till the soil for plant. So when we till the soil, we are sometimes losing soil organic matter. And also in this annual crops rotation, we have all these fallow periods here that as we don't have any crop that cover the soil has the risk to be lost by erosion, by wind or water, and also all the nutrients that are available in the soil. As there are not any roots that can catch this nutrient, we can lose this nutrient by leaching and cause water contamination. So one of the benefits of have perennial crops in our systems is that they can cover the soil and protect the soil, keep the soil in place around all the year. And also this root can catch this nutrient and avoid the lixiviation. And the other thing is, we mentioned something before, Nicole mentioned this, is that we can use this crop as a dual purpose. So we can harvest grain in the summer, and also we can harvest the straw, the summer forage, after we harvest the grain. And we can use also the forage that we can harvest in the fall or in the spring. And here there is a picture of the Kernza grain. As you can see, the grain is similar as other grasses seed, and we can use this grain to make flour. And with this flour, we can bake some bread, also bake some cakes or pancakes, and also we can consume you mentioned before the grain as a whole grain. So we can cook this grain as we cook rice and consume the whole grain in some salad or in other dishes. There is also in the market some cereals making with the whole grain of Kernza and pasta. And at least, but not less important, there is we can enjoy some beer that is making with the Kernza grain. And here is the picture of a brewery here in Wisconsin that they make an APA beer with the whole grain of Kernza. But also we can harvest forage in April before stem elongation. We can collect the straw after we harvest the grain in the summer. And we can even harvest or graze in the forage in the fall, in mid-October. So all these encourage farmers to try this new crop the intermediate wheatgrass Kernza. And some years ago, Marisa Lanker, Valentin Picasso, and other colleagues talk with different farmers and make surveys to try to understand the motivation of this farmer and the current limitation. And they say that they are interested in something new. They are looking to try something different. So these farmers are want to innovate or want to produce food in a more environmental friendly way. Also, they are interested in these new markets that are in development. And something that they mention, and all these researchers in this area agree, is that still we don't know much about the management. So here in Wisconsin, I am a postdoc in the Picasso research group. Here is it is Valentin Picasso. And in this forages and perennial grain group, most of us, we are studying different questions relating with this new crop, especially Corede, Erika, Stefania, and Dante. And we perform all of our experiment with the help of Ed, but he's very helpful for all these questions that we want to answer. So as intermediate wheatgrass is a new crop, we have a lot of questions related with that. So for example, what is the grain yield that farmers can expect for, if they plant Kernza, the forage quality and the profitability that they can have with these cropping systems. Also question relating with the planting, with the post-harvest management. As intermediate wheatgrass is a perennial crop, we need to know how to manage the crop after we harvest the grain and prepare the crop for the next year. The possibility of intercrop this crop with legumes, the fertilization that is needed for this crop, some question relating with the soil health, for example, the soil aggregation or the nutrient leaching, and also with the termination of this crop, because the idea is to try to include these perennial crops in the current agricultural rotation. So we need to know how to terminate and prepare the soil for the next cash crops. So here there are some numbers to have an idea of the potential. That these are the grain yield that we collect in different locations in our experiment in Lancaster, Montfort, Arlington, and Peninsula. And in the first year, farmers can expect around 100 and 800 pounds per acre. I would like to mention that this huge range is reflect that different experiment, and currently we are using some genotypes that have higher potential. So in the first year we are find higher yield than this 100, more similar to this. And something that is consistent is that in the following year, in the older stand, in the second, third, and fourth year, the yield, the grain yield declines. So we can harvest 60 or 500 pounds per acre. And as I mentioned before, grain is not the only outcome of this cropping system. We can harvest forage in fall or in the spring, around 2 tons per acre or 1.4 in the spring. And the quality of this forage is usually high. This is the relative feed value that when it's higher, reflect that the nutritive quality, the nutritive value is higher, and it is similar to other cool season grasses. And in the summer, if we harvest the straw after we harvest the grain, we can harvest much quantity of forage, summer forage, more than 6 tons per acre, but the relative feed value, as we are harvesting this forage in a reproductive stage, is lower. So in our lab, Dante Pizarro, it is a PhD student that worked with Valentin from the Animal and Dairy Science, and he want to know if it's possible to use this straw to include this in the dairy heifer diet. So the idea is that the pregnant dairy heifer require lower energy and a high fiber diet, and this straw have these characteristics. So the idea is that including straw in their diet can reduce the energy density and the dry matter intake, and it can help to avoid the overcondition, and this is something looking for in this pregnant dairy heifer. So he, as part of his PhD, had this experiment in Marshfield with 24 cows, and he applied different diets with different proportion of the Kernza straw in the diet, with 0%, 20%, and 40%. And he found that the inclusion of the intermediate wheatgrass straw reduced the dry matter intake and also the average daily gain, and significantly increased the methane intensity. So it's something that he is working on. And one important thing is that the heifer grown performance met the industry standard with a 40% of intermediate wheatgrass straw in the diet. So it's possible to use this straw in this diet and meet these industry standards. So in general, the management, considering that we can use this summer forage for that, is that we can plant this crop in the spring or in the fall, and we can harvest grain and forage. And we recommend harvest forage in the summer, so the straw after we harvest the Kernza grain, and in the fall. But it's recommended that we need to avoid the spring forage harvest to try to accumulate enough resources and allocate these resources to the Kernza grain. So this could be two different management. One thing that I would like to mention is that intermediate wheatgrass has vernalization requirement. So if we plant in the spring and the crop is not exposed to cold temperatures, we can produce grain this first summer. The first grain production is in the following year. And if we plant in the fall, we have the first grain production, so the next year. So if we compare these two alternatives, when we plant in the spring, we can harvest forage, the summer and the fall forage, and prepare the soil, the crop for the next year. And if we plant in the fall, we are not producing any forage, but we have the opportunity to use the summer for other cash crop, to produce other food during the summer. So we wanted to know the profitability of this system. So we asked Andrew Stevens, from who is an assistant professor, and he helps to estimate the profitability of systems that are planted in the spring or in the fall. So here you can see the estimated cost for both crop in general are the same. The only difference is that if we plant in the spring, we have more cost of the forage harvest because we have an extra harvest in the establishment year. But here we can see the incomes. And the thing that I would like to highlight is that a high proportion of the income that farmers could potentially receive come from the Kernza grain. So here we are seeing the dollars per hectare per year that are the average of the establishment year and the 2 grain production year. And even if the grain declined in the second and in the second year, the in average the proportion of the income come from the Kernza grain. And even the Kernza grain have low yields. The income is high because the price of the Kernza grain is currently high. So it's about $1.5 per pound. And this high Kernza price is related with the low availability of the grain currently, because the production is in development, but also because consumers agree to pay more for this grain, thinking about all these potential environmental benefits that this crop can have. So this is the annual profit that we estimate using this Kernza grain price, but also you can see here the annual profit if we consider that the Kernza price in the future could be half of the current price. And in this study, we also include systems that have intercropping with legumes. And one important thing is that the system that have legumes, a high proportion of the total income come from the summer and the fall forage, because legumes increase the total forage and also the quality of this forage. And this means that the reduction in the annual profit when the Kernza price is lower, this reduction, because the Kernza grain have a less impact in the total income. So, well, now I would like to show question that we are trying to answer in our group relating with the management of Kernza. And one is relating with the planting. So here we have Korede Olubenle. He is a PhD student, and he also worked with Kernza during his master. And one thing that he wants to try to understand is the effect of the planting date in the Kernza grain yields. So he, in his experiment that he installed both in Arlington and Lancaster, he planted the crop in different planting dates from August to through October, and also in April. And the importance of this question is relating that the seeds are available after we harvest Kernza grain. So if we harvest the grain in August, farmers could potentially have the seed to plant in September, mid-August, September, because we need to harvest the grain, process the grain, and this process could take a long time. So he wants to know if there is a benefit to try to plant early, or is a problem if we plant too late. And he found in his master thesis that the response has an optimal response. So here you can see the growing degree days that the plants accumulate before frost. So when we plant early, they accumulate more growing degrees days. And he found that the grain yield the next year was maximized at 500 kilograms per hectare when was planted in Arlington by 20 August, and at Lancaster when planted at 30 September. And one important thing about this study is that the effect of the planting date was only seen in the first grain production year. In the second grain production year, there was no any effect. So if we need to plant late or early, we could potentially have a negative effect in the first year, but not in the second year. And now, as part of his PhD, he's also asking questions about planting. So he has an experiment with different plant density from 10, 50, 100, or 200 plants per square meter, and also planting at different row spacing. And he has experiment in Arlington and also in France. He is currently there doing an internship. And well, other question that we wanted to know is related with the intercropping, with the possibility to plant legumes intercropping with intermediate wheatgrass. That, as I mentioned before, could have a potential benefit in the annual profit. So Stefania Cartoni was a master student that was working in this topic. She worked with different intercropping systems during her master, and she performed a different experiment considering different legumes species and planted at different row spacing in Arlington and in Peninsula. And as part of her research, we were working together, trying to understand the effect of different legumes, including as intercropping, in with planting the intermediate wheatgrass in spring or in the fall. So here you can see the grain yield in the first grain production year for the intermediate wheatgrass growing alone or in intercropping with persimmon clover or with kura clover, red clover, and alfalfa. And we can see here that when we plant intermediate wheatgrass in the fall, the intercropping systems have a similar grain yield that the monocrop. So this could be an interesting option because we are including legumes in our system with a lot of benefit, and we are not seeing any reduction in the grain. But when we plant intermediate wheatgrass and the legumes together in the spring, we found lower grain yields with red clover and alfalfa. The competition with these legumes was strong, and at the end of the day, the grain yield in this system were lower. And in the second grain production year, we observed lower yields compared with the first grain production year, and with the red clover, we observe the lower grain yields. Also, as part of her thesis, she shows this graph with considering different legumes, and you can see in general here the yield decline, and that in some years there are no different having a legume or not in our cropping system, but in other years, for example, in this case, in the second year, the intercropping with soybean has higher grain yield than intercropping with kura clover. And I would like to mention also that as part of the Kernza Gap, that is a big project that we are collaborating with researchers from Minnesota, Nebraska, Kansas, with Nicole here in Wisconsin. So we have 2 locations in Wisconsin and in Ohio. We have an experiment that we call Genotype by Environment by Management. And in this experiment, we include 2 legumes, alfalfa and red clover, And the interesting thing is that we are considered two different genotypes. These genotypes come from the Land Institute breeding program. They are different. This genotype have larger seeds, and this other produce more rhizomes. And the idea is that maybe different genotypes have different competition with the legumes, and the result of this intercropping could be different if we consider different legumes species, but also different intermediate wheatgrass genotypes. And we plant these genotypes at wide and also at narrow row spacing. And this allows us to estimate the effect of add a legume if we compare the intercropping with the wide row spacing, or the effect of replace intermediate wheatgrass with legumes if we compare these two. And all these treatments are part of a bigger experiment. We also include other genotypes from Minnesota that are not growing with intercropping, but we include all these genotypes in all the location and also planted at wide and at narrow row spacing. So I mentioned the Kernza Cup, that is this big project that we are collaborating, and the other big experiment that we are collaborating with that is relating with the fertilization and also with the nutrient leaching with different fertilization rates. So in all these locations, we have this experiment. So we have annuals, soybean and corn, and 10 different experiments with Kernza, where we apply different rates and different type of fertilizer. So each circle here represents the rate. For example, one circle represents 40 pounds per acre. And if you see more circles, that means that we are applying more nitrogen, in this case, 160 pounds per acre. So this experiment allows to answer different questions that we still want to know about the management in Kernza. So if we compare these different treatments with the air, we are comparing different rate, no nitrogen, an increasing rates of nitrogen. If we compare the T, we are comparing the timing, so we maintain the same, we keep the same rate, but we apply the rate in spring or in the fall, or half in the fall and the other half in spring. We are also comparing different sources, thinking about the organic system. So we are comparing the urea with the chicken manure. And also we are including the potassium and phosphorus application. And in this experiment, we also include some soil health questions. So in some of the treatment, we are comparing the annuals with some of the treatment with Kernza, and we are taking soil samples, and also we install some lysimeters. So we are collecting water from 1 meter depth, trying to understand if Kernza is able to catch this nutrient and avoid the lixiviation and the water contamination, even when we apply huge rates of fertilizers. And well, another of the question that we are looking for in our research group is relating with the post-harvest management. So as we see before, one of the challenges growing Kernza is the grain decline. So Erika Schoenberger, that she is currently a PhD student, but also worked with Kernza during her master. She was worried about that. And when I joined the lab, I started working with a data set that allows to understand the effect of different post-harvest management that we can do after we harvest the grain. And we apply the chemical or mechanical thinning that we remove some of the rows in the field. We apply also burning with fire, and we burn the straw or chopping the straw in the fall or in the spring. And we found that when we apply the mechanical thinning, when we remove some of the rows, the yield per row increase. But as in this treatment, we have lower rows per area. When we see the grain yield per area, we didn't find any difference. So Erica was inspired for this result, and in her thesis, she applied different percent of the thinning. So she has a treatment without any thinning, and she removed some of the rows in the field. In this treatment, she removed one row and leave the other, and you can see here how it looks. And she applied this thinning in spring. So she applied the thinning, and then the next summer she estimated the yields. And repeat this experiment in 2 different years. So in the first year that the stand had 3 years old, she didn't find any increase in the yields per row. So when she estimated the grain yield per hectare, she found a decline in the grain yield. So the post-harvest management doesn't work. But in the next year, she found something similar to me, that when she removed some of the rows, the grain per row increased, and at the end of the day, the grain yield per hectare remained constant. So this seems that the post-harvest management is not working. But last year, she go back for the same field and take samples in the next summer. So she applied the thinning on spring. In the first summer, she didn't see any effect, but in the second summer, after winter happened, she found an increase of 47% in the yield. So this is something that is interesting, and she is currently doing the same this year to see if she can find consistent work. Well, we are near to the end, so I mentioned a lot of management practices that we are trying to understand in our group, but one of these is determination, because as I mentioned before, the idea is to try to include this perennial crop in agricultural rotation. So we need to know how to terminate the crop and be ready for the next cash crop. And Korede, the same guy that was interested in how to plant Kernza, is also interested in how to kill this crop, how to terminate this crop. So he applied different termination way by tillage, mowing, or herbicide. And so far, this is the picture that he take this summer. After he terminate Kernza, he plant soybeans and alfalfa. And as you can see here, when he apply herbicide, the next cash crop look better. But we are trying to see if it's possible to use some of these methods. So he needs to analyze the yields of this crop and how it's going, because the idea is that organic farmers could include this intermediate wheatgrass in their rotation. So it's good to know if we can use one of these other methods. So far is all that we are trying to do in our lab, and thank you so much. I think that we have a couple of minutes for question, but also here there is my email if you want to write me. So thank you.
Thanks, Priscilla. That was amazing. Thanks for summarizing everybody else's research in your lab too.
Okay.
Yeah, so any questions for Priscilla? There were so many research projects going on.
Yeah, I think that it was too much information.
No, it was great. It was really good overview on everything going on. You presented Correde's research on planting dates and
Yeah.
how that affected the yield. And it showed that like the August planting date at least in Arlington had the highest yields. And was that the earliest date that he had actually planted, or I mean, what? Yeah, did he actually try any earlier than that, or would there be any benefit to trying earlier?
I think so. Earlier, there is like a practical answer here. So if as we plant, as we harvest the grain in August, it's not possible to having the grain before August. So maybe we can harvest and wait until the next year to plant. And in this case, if farmers decide that they want to plant Kernza, maybe it's an option to plant in spring and harvest the forage. So it's like he didn't include this in his research because or you are using the summer for other cash crop, or you are planting then, or you want to plant very early and use the summer. But in this gap, there is no, I think, even if it could be interest, I think that it's not matching with the agricultural structure for that the farmer have.
Yeah, that makes complete sense.
Okay. And as you can see in the planting too early doesn't seem to be a good option also, as we observe this optimal response. So yeah, so far this is what I in my understanding the answer.
Yeah, cool.
So that was recommending fall planting?
Yes. Yes, in general, yeah, we recommend the fall planting, and if you consider the intercropping is recommended to plant the intermediate wheatgrass in the fall, and then next spring fruit seed the legumes. So this allows to have a good growth of Kernza, and then the legumes start to grow, but with a grass already establishment, so the competition is not so high.
Nicole had mentioned failure rates. Is there a correlation between like those being spring plantings, like the 1/3 that she had mentioned?
Sorry, there is a lot of noise about.
I kind of hear it. Yeah, Nicole had mentioned that about 1/3 of the plantings didn't go so well. And so I wondered if a high percentage of those, of that third, was a spring planting versus a fall planting.
Yeah, the thing is that if we plant in the spring, the first summer we are not harvest any grain because the vernalization requirement. So then the decision is more an economical decision. We didn't see any positive effect of having a plant in the spring. So if we compare it in the next summer, compared with planting in the fall, we didn't observe a benefit in terms of more grain yield because of a planting very, very early in the spring. So I think that the decision is more thinking about the system and how the farmer decide in terms of other reason how you want to use the summer. But the thing that we need to consider is that in this first summer we are not harvest any grain, and there is not a benefit to expect more grain yield in the other summer. But well, sometimes it's good to consider to having this extra forage harvest during the summer, and it's an option.